Okay, let's begin. Those at the back who need a seat, I think that seating is going to be made available outside. If you don't mind standing, that's okay. I want to welcome everyone to this evening's proceedings. Special welcome to members of faculty and staff of the University of the West Indies. The registrar is here. I want to welcome him and thank him very much for his cooperation for us using this facility. I would say that this evening's debate comes at a very peculiar time for Trinidadians and Tobagonians. It is, among other things, not the kind of moment during which we have found ourselves in a particularly contemplative mood. It is a national dry run, or should we say dry spell of sorts. A long one in which the real action seems too long in coming, and very few appear to be paying attention to the substantive elements of human development. That's my part of the debate, my contribution to the debate. Discussions that attempt to come to terms with some fundamental aspects of the way we function as individuals and society, therefore appear to be in very short supply these days. As a result, it is probably not true to say that this evening's question is one that resides too permanently in the public imagination, or that is, to use the old cliche, that it is a question that continues to engage all mankind since the first moments of human existence. We are here, nevertheless, to see what we can do to ask some questions and perhaps to find a few answers. I want to first introduce you to our two debaters, Dr. Christopher Starr and Mr. Joseph Caterson. Christopher Starr is a senior lecturer in entomology here at the University of the West Indies. He was born in Canada and has been residing in Trinidad and Tobago for 19 years. He describes himself as a born-again atheist, having roots in what used to be called the Religious Society of Friends, popularly known as the Quakers. Joseph Caterson is a retired telecoms expert who has been studying and teaching the Bible for over 35 years. He is the administrator of the Association of Evangelical Bible Churches of Trinidad and Tobago and is also a counselor and mentor to many within evangelical Christian circles. Beyond these credentials, I can say that these are two fine gentlemen with a sense of humor that rose to the surface very quickly when they first met. When was it? About a month ago. But before we continue, get into the meat of the debate, a word now about the format of this evening's proceedings. As I said at the start, it is my intention to run a pretty tight ship here. I'm not going to compromise on timelines, including my own. In a few moments from now, you, the audience, will vote on your choice of the first speaker. And the question we are debating this evening is there. Now, each speaker, beginning with Chris, will have 25 minutes to make his case. We have a timer in the audience, someone I've ambushed at the last minute, who has a pretty accurate timer. He's going to keep check on that. And if necessary, I have a whistle, which I'll blow when the speaker's time is finished, if necessary. Following these presentations, each speaker will in turn ask the other 3 one-minute questions. No follow-up questions are permitted, and the responses should be no longer than 3 minutes each. Then we'll entertain questions from the floor by 4 pre-selected persons. And that's rather deliberate, and we knew what we are doing with this so that we can have a balance with respect to the worldviews of the questioners, and things don't get out of hand, won't get out of hand very easily that way. The questions, again, should be no longer than 1 minute, to be followed by 3-minute responses by the two debaters in an order to be determined by me. At the end of questions from the floor, each speaker will make 5-minute winding up remarks in the reverse order in which the debate opened, so that when there are the closing remarks, Joe will speak first. At first, it was the intention to have some sort of wrap-up statement from me as moderator, but we have decided to give this responsibility to the floor. So those of you who might have pulled a piece of paper from a box indicating that you will be among the 4 persons from the floor to do the wrap-up comments, stand by, because that's the role you will play at the end of the wrap-up questions, the wrap-up statements. So you know who you are. Feel free. We use an entirely random method, to arrive at that. Yes. No, it's the final wrap-up statements. After you 2 of you ask each other questions, will be led off by you. So it's the reverse order from when we started the debate. So the opening statement, the opening presentation is going to be by Christopher, and it's going to begin with Christopher, and the closing statements are going to begin with Joe.
So you mean the first should be last
and the last shall be first. Okay, so let's begin. Dr. Christopher Starr. Is there a God?
An agnostic, I'm sure many or most of you are familiar with this term. An agnostic is one who does not feel confident to decide whether there is a God or not, and may even maintain that the question cannot be answered in principle. Joe and I are not agnostics. If my remarks cause some of the believers present, and I believe there's a whole lot of them, some of the believers present to doubt or to doubt more than you already did, well, that's fine. I have no objection. But that's not exactly my purpose tonight. I'm not exactly here to convert people to my point of view. Over the years, I've met a great many people who earnestly did not get the concept of no God. They simply did not understand how people, especially a smart, educated, well-adjusted person like me, could not believe in God. And I've had people actually say that. Well, Chris, how is it possible that you do not believe in God? So tonight I'm going to try to show how good and decent people can reasonably think that there is no God, not even one, and be comfortable with this conclusion. And I'd like you all to pay attention, because if tomorrow or next week somebody should say to you, I just don't see how someone can possibly be an atheist, then whether you agree with me or not, I expect you to say, well, as a matter of fact, I can enlighten you on that question. So you're going to have to pay attention. Students, take lots of notes. This is going to be on the test. As Wesley indicated, my own upbringing was Christian. And I'll draw my illustrations mainly or entirely from the Jewish Christian tradition. I'm far from being a Bible scholar, but I have to admit that I know the Quran and the Gita even less well than the Bible. Even so, the main points, and almost certainly Joe's main points, will be relevant to these other traditions as well. The question of the existence of God is by no means a new one. People have thought and written a great deal about it over the centuries, and a great many arguments have been set forth on both sides. The argument from this, the argument from that, the argument from the other. Now here are a couple of examples of just such arguments, and I've deliberately chosen rather simple ones. So here is an argument in favor of the existence of God. And I think many of you will notice right away that this is in the scholastic tradition, arising out of the Christian adaptation of the philosophy of Aristotle and Plato. And so the first point there, today that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to us. I mean, we don't find that very convincing. Here's another one. I've had to give this a name, a rather clunky name, because I don't see that it has a standard name. And right away you look down through that, and I looked down through that, and I came to point 3, and I said, well, who says? I mean, if there's a God, what is to stop God from creating something that is not perfect? I don't find this one very convincing at all. Now, those two arguments that I've just put up as examples have one thing in common. You have already forgotten them, right? And there's a very good reason for that. Neither of them has much to do with why real live people in their everyday lives believe or do not believe or are not sure. So in other words, these arguments that I've just outlined for you don't really speak to the question that we're here for. They don't really speak to our condition today. Now I'm going to say something in very summary fashion about 5 other arguments that evidently are relevant. How do I know they're relevant? Because I've heard them from time to time. I've had lots of discussions on religious questions. And so I'm going to draw from my own experience things that I've actually heard. These are arguments that people have presented to me on one or another side of the question. Blaise Pascal was a great thinker and a great mathematician. As far as I know, he did the first ever controlled experiment. Now, the argument known as Pascal's wager is not exactly a reason why God must exist, but it's closely related to that, and it comes up in these discussions all the time. It goes something like this. Let's say we don't know whether there is a God or not, and consider the consequences of believing or not believing. I expect already this is sounding familiar to many of you. So if you believe and you're mistaken, you don't lose anything. If, on the other hand, there is a God and you don't believe, well, major consequences, okay? Your immortal soul is in peril. So, says Pascal, you're better off believing. Now, I don't know whether Pascal was kidding. It's possible he was just having fun with this argument. But I have heard this argument. And the thing that strikes me about it right away is just how incredibly weenie it is. I mean, you know, you believe in God because of the consequences. I mean, you know, you just decide to believe. I mean, how do you do that? How does any person of integrity just decide to do that? So I've never had any respect for this argument, but I do hear it from time to time, so I thought I'd bring it up. If you are approached with this argument, you'll probably just want to get rid of whomever is setting it forth. So here's what you do. You say, oh, really? Okay, better off believing. Well, just to play it safe, I guess I should also believe in Thoth, Freya, Zeus, Apollo, Wodan, Artemis, and Dem. What do you say? And of course the answer will be, no, 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 that's not what I meant. I meant you should believe in the God in whom I happen to believe. Well, that is really very, very weenie and doesn't deserve any further attention. The argument from morality, unlike Pascal's wager, can be taken seriously, and on the face of it, it looks decidedly compelling. Okay, thank you. All right, on the face of it, it looks rather compelling. And it goes like this. It's not exactly an argument for the existence of God, but it's an argument why you hope other people believe in God. And it says basically that religion is good for society, that a society of believers is more moral than a society of unbelievers. And on the face of it, this looks really very compelling, doesn't it? After all, the moral code of most religions obligates the adherents to protect the weak, feed the hungry, and heal the sick if they can, to foster safe and healthy living conditions in society, etc. So it would seem to follow that if you've got a society mostly made up of believers, then that society will be more moral. But just because it seems logically to follow doesn't mean it's true. And in fact, there is next to no evidence of any strong correlation there. If there's any relationship between religious belief and morality, it's a very weak one. And you can come up with plenty of examples of this. For instance, the average British person goes to church less than once a year and is effectively an atheist, even if she or he does not put that label on. Is Britain a worse society? Are people worse to each other than they are in other societies with lots of believers? I don't think you would say so, and in Scandinavia, even more so. Let's put it on a more personal level. What about me? Am I a bad guy? I mean, Indar, don't answer that. I mean, all these things that, the moral codes of religions, compel, well, I do those already, and yet I don't believe any of it. Now, some people say, oh, well, Chris, you must be a secret Christian. Well, I mean, it's not like Christians are persecuted, by the great mass of atheists in our society. I mean, why would you be a Christian, a secret Christian? It's better to take it on faith that I and many people like me do not believe, and yet we, for the most part, do the right thing. Now, I'm sure you've heard stories of somebody who did not believe and got religion and became a better person. As far as I know, it never happened to anybody you actually knew. It happened to a friend of a friend of a friend. These things probably do sometimes occur. Getting religion probably sometimes does, but there is certainly no strong correlation. And the reason is quite simple. Here's a shocker for you folks. People are basically good. Okay? These things that, you're supposed to do according to moral codes, most people at least make an attempt to do those things. And the reason is because good morals flow from being human. It's part of being human. And religion really has nothing to do with it one way or the other. The classic argument in Christianity, as far as I know, it's never had any particular hold in Islam. It's never been taken very seriously in Islam, as far as I'm aware. Vedanta, I'm afraid I don't know. Now, one very simple way of posing it is everything is in motion, different things affect each other's motion, and therefore there must have been something to set it all in motion in the beginning. That is so nifty. The trouble is, if you've studied physics in the last 300 years, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, there's no particular reason why something that is not set in motion by God should be at rest rather than in motion. But that's not how it's normally posed. The way it's normally posed to me, in my own experience, is by the question, where did we come from? I've heard it said in those very words or something very similar. Where did we all come from? There must have been something that created us in the beginning. Well, the classic answer to that, which remains, as far as I know, the main answer today, was set forth by the Scottish philosopher David Hume in this book that I've cited here. And Hume basically said, okay, so who created God? If an orderly, purposeful universe requires a special designer or creator, then that creator, if it's accepted that it requires a creator, then that creator, with that very orderly, purposeful mind, would also require a creator. And that one would require a creator, and so on and so forth. Hume said, if you're content with just one self-ordered mind that you call God, why not be content with a self-ordered natural world? And that's just in very summary fashion his argument. The teleological argument, I suspect that this is the argument that is more persuasive to believers overall than any other. And in fact, it's a pretty good one. Let's consider the sun, for instance. Well, the sun is a magnificent part of the universe. I mean, you get up there, if you go out and you look out over an east-facing sea and you watch the sun come up, so gleaming, so perfect, so regular. You've heard the phrase, as sure as the sun will rise tomorrow. You can count on the sun. Well, you look at that, and if you're not in awe, then there's something missing. However, illustrations of design that I have usually encountered come from living organisms and their adaptations. And here's an example right here, the vertebrate eye. It's a favorite example. in the argument from design, or the teleological argument. And it goes something like this. The parts of this or another complex living adaptation work together marvelously to a single purpose. If any single part of this eye, or something comparable to it, does not work, the whole eye fails. Therefore, it is absurd to suggest that it could have come about except by design. Somebody must have designed it. And let's just go back for a moment. The really classic argument was set forth by William Paley in a book in 1802 that for a long time was a key part of the curriculum in British universities. And in this book, Paley, although he was not a biologist, stated his wonder. He knew his subject and he stated his wonder, which I hope we all share, at the beauty and complexity of organic life. Okay, so it's absurd to suggest that something that the eye, according to this argument, could have come about except by design. It shows a mind of vast intelligence and power far beyond anything in this world. Well, in fact, in this and most other examples, it's not hard for an experienced biologist to show that in fact it's not perfect. It's got flaws in it. The obvious example here is the optic nerve there. I mean, that's where you get your blind spot. It doesn't really bother us, but it's, I mean, any designer would call that a flaw. And it's certainly not true to say that a defective eye is no better than none at all, as the argument goes. So those of you who wear glasses, take off your glasses and look out at me. I mean, are you now blind? You're not as well off. An eye that doesn't function as well as a perfect eye is still better than no eye at all. Now, last month we celebrated the 200th birthday of this man, Charles Darwin, who caused an uproar in the mid-19th century by setting forth his theory of evolution by natural selection. And the reason it caused such an uproar is because it struck at the heart of the argument from design. It was a new explanation that was far superior to the theory of special creation in explaining the known pattern and predicting new observations in nature. Now, we could go on about that for a long time, but I want to get to a different subject in a bit. The argument from evil. This is the one I'm going to bring up, the one classic argument against the existence of God. No one questions that terrible things often happen to people who appear to deserve much better. Now, occasionally one hears that this and this calamity was actually brought on by people being wicked or by their being a wicked person in New Orleans at that time, for instance. But good and decent people reject these things out of hand. Good and decent people say, no, that is a calamity. That is manifestly unfair. And to try to explain it because, you know, the people of New Orleans were wicked or because there were some wicked people among them it causes revulsion. Now, note that the existence of evil is not exactly an argument against the existence of God. So, for instance, the ancient Greeks or the Norsemen would have had no problem with it. They would have had no problem with the idea that you've got a powerful, all-knowing God, and yet you've got evil amongst us. You've got unfair suffering of innocent people. I haven't discussed this with any Jews, but I suspect that they likewise would have no problem with it. After all, look at the portrait of God set forth in the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of literature. Petty, unjust, vicious, even frankly genocidal. I tell you folks, you crack open the Old Testament and you read the characteristics of God set in there, and if your skin doesn't crawl, it's on too tight. Let's consider the conquest of Canaan, in which the Israelites, following God's explicit instructions, conducted themselves in a way that each and every one of you would consider barbaric. Now, when I was in high school, we had a song. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. We sang that. I mean, it's so rousing. It sounds great. You know, Joshua went and fought the good fight. And then I read the book of Joshua. Do you know what the people of Jericho were doing when Joshua and the Israelites, following the orders of God, went and slaughtered every single one of them? They were minding their own business. They were like the Plains Indians of the United States. They were on land that was coveted, and this happened over and over and over again. I believe in the case of the Midianites, maybe Joe will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in that case they spared the virgin women for breeding purposes. I mean, that is grotesque. So I don't think the argument from evil is going to cause any particular problem among certainly the ancient Israelites, but it is, in my experience, one of the two main causes of people losing their faith. Over and over again, many formerly religious people have looked at it and they said, you know, the suffering that we see is not consistent with an all-knowing, all-powerful, and benevolent God. It just doesn't add up. Well, we're going to have to move on. I'd now like to step back from the specific arguments to consider the relationship between two major human activities. What is the relationship between religion and science? And you get a lot of waffling on this. Well, let me put it to you very, very simply. Religion and science are implacably, irreconcilably antagonistic to each other. And that doesn't have to do with the teachings that arise out of them. It doesn't even especially have to do with the particular evidence that's used in support of one or the other. It is quite simply that religion is based on faith and science is based on doubt. It is very easy. It happens all the time. Probably happens at least once a week for most experienced scientists, maybe several times a day. And there is a question at the heart of all scientific practice, and that is, how would I know if I were wrong? This comes up immediately. How would I know, how if I wanted to, how could I test this hypothesis that has just occurred to me? Well, let's take a look at an example. You've all heard of cold fusion. In 1989, two scientists reported that they had brought about nuclear fusion at room temperature in the laboratory. Well, this caused a lot of excitement, because if this could be done, and nuclear fusion creates a very substantial release of heat, of energy, what it meant was that there was promise of a very cheap source of energy. So this got a great deal of attention. It brought about a flurry of experimental work in the ensuing months. After all, in the scientific attitude, if cold fusion is a real process, then you should be able to predict certain things that are not yet known that would flow from it. You should be able to predict particular observations. So they did that. And the results were entirely unfavorable to the reality of cold fusion. So what did the scientists do? Did they say cold fusion works in mysterious ways? Did they say the devil manipulated the experiments to deceive us? Did they say these results are a test of my faith? I know in my heart that cold fusion exists. No, they didn't. They said, well, according to the evidence, cold fusion is not a real phenomenon, and they moved along. Now, those who try to harmonize religion and science usually do so by maintaining that they are entirely separate ways of understanding the world, that they are different sets of truths. In fact, I don't think so. Precisely because religion is based on faith and not on doubt, precisely because the question, how would I know if I were wrong about this or that, is not at the heart of its practice, religion is entirely powerless to bring about new knowledge. The sum contribution of religion to understanding the world can be summarized in one word. Begins with D. Anybody? Doodly squat. Let me make a modest suggestion here. If you really, truly want to know whether God exists, this question, like that of cold fusion, should be put in the hands of scientists. Okay? In summary then, or in wrapping up, if there exists a God, then the world you expect is a very different place, and its attributes can be predicted, and therefore it is possible in principle to decide on scientific grounds whether a God exists, and those are the people who ought to do it. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm just going to dive right in. I want to approach this in three ways. Some say there is no God. Such a claim has to be based on unlimited knowledge. If I say there's no gold in China, then it means that I know there's no gold in China. If one Chinese guy has a gold tooth, I'm in trouble. Now, interestingly, unlimited knowledge or omniscience is an attribute of God. So, if our brother Chris says, there is no God, then there is a God. He has absolute knowledge.